Hey everyone, today we're diving into one of the earliest and most fascinating civilizations of the ancient world, the Sumerians. They lived in what we now call southern Iraq, way back from the mid-4th millennium B.C.E. until the rise of Babylonia in the late 3rd millennium B.C.E. That's a long time ago. So, who were the Sumerians? Well, they were the people who spoke the Sumerian language. They, along with the Egyptians and the Indus Valley people, are considered one of the very first true civilizations on Earth. What made them so special? For starters, they developed the concept of the city-state, which was a big deal. This allowed them to build amazing things like temples called Ziggurats, and to advance in areas like art, commerce, and writing. The Sumerians were also pioneers in law and order. They created some of the earliest known laws, which helped keep peace and stability in their city-states. These laws set specific penalties for different crimes, showing they understood the importance of respect for life, property, and shared values. Trade and commerce were also big for the Sumerians. They preferred making treaties and trading with their neighbors, rather than fighting. This not only helped their economy but also spread their influence far and wide. Now, let's talk a bit about their background. The Sumerians weren't Semitic people, and at one point, some thought they might have been invaders because their language seemed different. However, archaeology shows that they had a continuous presence in the region from the early Ubad period. Living in southern Iraq wasn't easy. The area gets less than 5 inches of rain a year, so the Sumerians had to get creative with their water supply. They mastered the art of irrigation, creating canals, dikes, and reservoirs to make sure they had water for farming and drinking all year round. By the late 4th millennium B.C.E., Sumer was a collection of about a dozen independent city-states, each with its own temple dedicated to a patron god or goddess. These city-states were ruled by a priest or a king who played a key role in religious rituals. As we dive deeper into the history of the Sumerians, we enter the Ubad and Uruk periods. These were the early days when the Sumerian city-states began to rise to power. The real historical records start to appear during the early dynastic period around the 29th century BCE, though they are a bit sparse until the Lagash period in the 26th century. The classical Sumerian era comes to an end with the rise of the Akkadian Empire in the 24th century. After a chaotic period dominated by the Gutians, there was a brief resurgence known as the Sumerian Renaissance in the 22nd century, which was unfortunately cut short around 2000 BCE by the Amorite invasions. Eventually, the Amorites established the dynasty of Ishin, which lasted until around 1730 BCE, when Mesopotamia was unified under Babylonian rule. During the Ubad period, from 5300 to 3900 BCE, there was a distinctive style of high-quality painted pottery that spread across Mesopotamia and the Persian Gulf region. The ancient Sumerian religious center of Eridu was gradually overtaken in size by the nearby city of Uruk. The transition from the Ubad period to the Uruk period is marked by a shift from painted pottery made on a slow wheel to a variety of unpainted pottery mass-produced on fast wheels. This change, which happened around 4500 BCE, was significant in the development of Sumerian society. By the time of the Uruk period, from 4500 to 3100 BCE, trade had become a crucial part of Sumerian life. Goods were transported along canals and rivers, leading to the rise of large temple-centered cities with centralized administrations and specialized workers. It was during this period that Sumerian cities began using slave labor, with slaves often captured from the hill country. The influence of Uruk civilization spread far and wide, with artifacts and colonies found from Turkey to Iran. The Uruk period ended with a dry spell known as the Prior Oscillation around 3200 to 2900 BCE, marking the close of a wetter, warmer climate phase. When the historical record becomes clearer, we see the Sumerians confined to southern Mesopotamia. Early rulers like Lugal and Mundu, and legendary figures like Enmerkar and Gilgamesh, expanded Sumerian culture to neighboring regions. In the early dynastic period, the Sumerian king list tells of early dynasties, blending myth with history. The first king whose name is known from other sources is Etana of Kish. The first king confirmed by archaeological evidence is Enmebrigezi of Kish, who is also mentioned in the Epic of Gilgamesh. This suggests that Gilgamesh himself may have been a historical king of Uruk. Lugal-Zage-C, the priest king of Umma, eventually overthrew the Lagash dynasty and made Uruk his capital, claiming an empire from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean. He was the last ethnically Sumerian king before the arrival of Sargon of Akkad. The Lagash dynasty, known through significant monuments, saw the rise of empires such as that of Enadam of Lagash, who conquered most of Sumer and extended his realm to Elam and the Persian Gulf. His reign was marked by the use of terror, as depicted on the stele of the vultures, which shows violent treatment of enemies. The Akkadian dynasty, emerging around 2450 to 2250 BCE, saw the Semitic Akkadian language become prominent. Old Akkadian texts started appearing around 2500 BCE. Though Sumerian remained the main language for administrative purposes, Sargon the Great, ruling from 2350 to 2330 BCE, expanded the Akkadian Empire, even imposing Akkadian on neighboring Elam. Following the fall of the Akkadian Empire at the hands of the Gutians, Gudea of Lagash emerged as a prominent ruler, promoting artistic development and continuing the divine claims of the Sargonic kings. The third dynasty of Ur, under Namu and Shulgi, marked the last great Sumerian renaissance. Despite this, the region was becoming more Semitic with the influx of Amorites, who later founded the Babylonian Empire. Sumerian continued to be used as a ceremonial language, much like Latin in medieval Europe. Ecologically, the agricultural productivity of Sumerian lands suffered due to rising salinity. The evaporation of irrigation water left salts in the soil, making farming increasingly difficult. This led to a major depopulation of southern Mesopotamia around 2000 BCE, ultimately contributing to the collapse of Sumerian culture. Following the Elamite invasion and the sacking of Ur during the rule of Ibbi-Sin around 2004 BCE, Sumer came under Amorite rule, signaling the beginning of the Middle Bronze Age. This period saw the emergence of independent Amorite states, collectively known as the Dynasty of Ishin, and the Sumerian king list, which lasted until the rise of Babylonia under Hammurabi around 1730 BCE. This era marked a significant shift in the population from southern Iraq to the north, largely due to the increasing salinity of the soil. Salinity had long been a problem in the region, caused by poorly drained irrigation in an arid climate with high evaporation rates. This resulted in the accumulation of crystalline salt in the soil, severely reducing agricultural yields. During the Akkadian and Ur III periods, farmers transitioned from cultivating wheat to the more salt-tolerant barley. However, this adaptation wasn't enough, and between 2100 BCE and 1700 BCE, the population in the area declined by nearly 60%. This shift weakened the Sumerian-speaking regions and strengthened the Akkadian-speaking areas. As a result, Sumerian became a liturgical and sacred language, much like Latin in medieval Europe. The Sumerians had a robust agricultural system, adopting irrigation techniques similar to those used in Egypt. They cultivated a variety of crops, including barley, chickpeas, lentils, wheat, dates, onions, garlic, lettuce, leeks, and mustard. They also raised livestock such as cattle, sheep, goats, and pigs. Oxen were their primary beasts of burden, while donkeys were used for transport. Fishing and hunting were also important for sustenance, with fish, fowl, and gazelle commonly caught. Irrigation was vital to Sumerian agriculture. They used shadufs, canals, channels, dikes, weirs, and reservoirs to manage water. The frequent flooding of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers meant that canals required constant maintenance. Citizens were often required to work on canal maintenance, although the wealthy could buy exemptions. After the flood season and the spring equinox, farmers would flood their fields using the canals, then drain the water and prepare the soil for planting. They used oxen to stomp the ground and kill weeds, followed by plowing, harrowing, and raking the soil before planting seeds. The high evaporation rates eventually led to increased soil salinity, forcing farmers to switch from wheat to barley. The Sumerians harvested crops in the dry fall season using 3-person teams, a reaper, a binder, and a sheaf arranger. They used threshing wagons and sleds to separate and process the grain, and winnowed the grain/chaff mixture to obtain the final product. Architecturally, the Tigris-Euphrates plain lacked minerals and trees, so Sumerian structures were primarily built from mud brick. These buildings were periodically destroyed and rebuilt on the same spot, raising the level of the cities over time. These elevated areas, known as tells, are found throughout the ancient Near East. The most notable Sumerian structures were the ziggurats, large layered platforms that supported temples. Some scholars believe these structures inspired the biblical Tower of Babel. Sumerian cylinder seals depict reed houses similar to those built by the marsh Arabs of southern Iraq until recently. The Sumerians also developed the arch, which allowed them to construct strong roofs called domes. Sumerian temples and palaces incorporated advanced architectural techniques such as buttresses, recesses, half columns, and clay nails. The Sumerian culture had 2 main centers, Eridu in the south and Nippur in the north. Eridu was the home of the culture god Enki, who was associated with wisdom, water, and creation. Nippur was the center of the god Enlil, who was connected to the air, wind, and storms. These 2 centers represented contrasting aspects of Sumerian religion and culture. The Code of Hammurabi, based on Sumerian law, and the Sumerian flood myth, similar to the Epic of Gilgamesh, suggests that the development of city-states aimed to ensure peace. Ancient Sumerian treaties indicate a preference for resolving disputes through negotiation rather than conflict. Commerce and trade were highly valued in Sumerian society, and women, although protected by law, had a lower status than men. Music played an essential role in religious and civic life, with lyres being a popular instrument. The Sumerians had an extensive trade network, evidenced by the discovery of obsidian from Anatolia, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, beads from Dilmun, modern Bahrain, and seals inscribed with the Indus Valley script. The Epic of Gilgamesh mentions trade with distant lands for scarce goods like cedar from Lebanon. Slaves, although not a major part of the economy, were used for various labor tasks. Sumerian craftsmen made pottery decorated with cedar oil paints and used alabaster, ivory, gold, silver, carnelian, and lapis lazuli for their creations. And the constant wars among the Sumerian city-states over 2 millennia significantly advanced their military technology and tactics. One of the earliest recorded conflicts was between Lagash and Umma in 2525 B.C.E. depicted on the stele of vultures. This artifact shows the king of Lagash leading an army primarily composed of infantry. These soldiers carried spears and were equipped with copper helmets and leather shields. They fought in a disciplined phalanx formation, indicating that they were professional soldiers trained for battle. The Sumerian military also utilized carts harnessed to onagers, a type of wild ass. These early chariots, although not as effective in combat as later designs, served mainly as transport vehicles. The chariots were made of woven baskets and had either 4 or 2 solid 3-piece wheels. Each chariot was manned by a crew of 2, armed with battle axes and lances. Defensive walls surrounded Sumerian cities, and they engaged in siege warfare, despite the mud brick walls often failing to keep out determined invaders. The Sumerians' approach to warfare evolved over time, incorporating new technologies and strategies as needed. Sumerian society was polytheistic, with each city-state worshipping its own set of deities. Anu, the sky god, was considered the primary deity, with his consort Ki representing the earth. The collective term for the gods was Anunnaki, meaning offspring of the Lord. Anu's closest associates were Enki, the god of wisdom and water, worshipped in the south at Eridu, and Lil, the god of air and storms, venerated in the north at Nippur, and Inanna, the goddess of love and war, worshipped at Uruk. Other significant deities included Utu, the sun god worshipped at Sippar, and Nana, the moon god worshipped at Ur. Sumerian religion also featured a mother goddess named Namu, who was believed to be the original matrix of creation. Each god had associations with specific cities, and their importance often fluctuated with the political power of those cities. The Sumerians believed that the gods created humans from clay to serve them. They thought that natural disasters like earthquakes and storms were expressions of the gods' anger and frustration. According to Sumerian cosmology, the universe was a flat disk enclosed by a tin dome. The afterlife was seen as a gloomy underworld where souls, or Jiddim, spent eternity in a wretched existence. Sumerian temples had a distinctive architectural style. They featured a forecourt with a central purification pond called the Abzu. The main temple building had a central nave with aisles on either side and rooms for priests flanking the aisles. At one end of the nave stood a podium and a mud brick table for sacrifices. Over time, temples were built on top of multi-layered terraces, forming the iconic ziggurats. The Sumerians were pioneers in many areas of technology. They invented the wheel, cuneiform writing, arithmetic, and geometry. They developed complex irrigation systems in boats, including skin boats, sailboats, and oared ships. Their technological innovations also included bronze tools, leather goods, and various types of weaponry and armor. Language and writing were crucial aspects of Sumerian culture. The most significant archaeological finds from Sumer are numerous clay tablets inscribed with Sumerian text. These texts date back to around 3500 B.C.E. and represent one of the earliest known forms of writing. Sumerian is considered a language isolate, meaning it has no known relatives. It is an agglutinative language, meaning that words are formed by combining morphemes or units of meaning. Sumerian writing evolved from picture hieroglyphs into cuneiform script, competing with ancient Egyptian as the oldest known written language. The vast majority of Sumerian texts have survived on clay tablets and include a wide range of documents, from personal and business letters to legal texts, hymns, prayers, and scientific treatises. Monumental inscriptions and texts on objects like statues and bricks are also common. Sumerian remained the language of religion and law long after Semitic languages became dominant in the region. The legacy of the Sumerians is immense. They are credited with inventing the wheel and cuneiform writing. They were among the first astronomers to develop a heliocentric view of the solar system. Their advancements in arithmetic led to the creation of the sexagesimal system, which influenced the modern clock and calendar. They also developed the first known codified legal and administrative systems and established the first true city-states. However, the Sumerians' reliance on irrigation eventually led to their downfall. Over time, the irrigation water caused salination of the soil, reducing its fertility. Initially, they switched from wheat to the more salt-tolerant barley, but the continued accumulation of salt eventually made agriculture unsustainable. This environmental degradation contributed to the decline of Sumerian civilization, demonstrating the delicate balance between human innovation and the natural environment.